You're
All right.
not even old.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be going over adding a Cypress test suite to our actual project. We're going to reinforce a couple of things that we want to go over. Well, let's go ahead and go through the process of actually connecting Cypress once again. All right, so we want to I'm going to go into this other terminal that I have to install dependencies. I'm going to go ahead and change directories into this project. I apologize if you all can hear my dog. It seems he has things to say to me. All right, so currently I'm within my project, and I know I'm within my project because if I run an ls, I can see that I have my package.json. Okay, so now that I have my package.json, I can actually install Cypress. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our curriculum so that we can make sure that we're installing Cypress correctly. Since obviously I don't expect anyone to remember these commands off the top of their heads. Okay, so it looks like we want to do an npm install. We want to install Cypress, and we want it to be saved within our dev dependencies. So I'm going to run the npm install Cypress --save -dev. That will install Cypress within my development dependencies. Once it's done, this might help. Okay, so now I crashed the other server just to allow this to install correctly. I can take a look at package.json. And now within my dev dependencies, I can see the Cypress has been included. Okay, so I know Cypress is included. And if I run npx Cypress open, that will initialize Cypress and open up a Chromium browser with Cypress inside of it. Cypress secure coding is not enabled for
Don't you need to turn your server back on?
I do, but not just yet. Okay, so it did open up the browser. It was just hiding from me behind one of my windows. So now we can see that I have Cypress, but it's telling me that neither of them are configured and nothing's running. So let's go over the configuration process to getting Cypress to actually work together. So now when I ran this Cypress, it didn't create a file for me. I remember you all mentioned that for some of you, it actually created a file for you to be able to define the configurations for Cypress. In my case, it did not. So I need to create a configuration file that Cypress can utilize to run my test suite. So I'm going to go ahead and at the root level, create a cypress.config.js. It's just a file. Well, when I open this up, I need to actually tell it what it's going to do with Cypress. Well, I'm going to import one of the functions from Cypress, which is I'm going to define a configuration. And I need to tell it that this defined configuration is coming from Cypress. That way, whenever I run my Cypress test suite, Cypress can look at the configuration that I'm passing into it and actually be able to read and run my test suite. Okay, let's see. Oh, well, I closed it already. All right. So now that I have this information, I can actually start defining this defined config. So I'm going to export this configuration so that Cypress can actually utilize it. And it's going to take an object. Now, this kind of gives me a hint over the objects that it can take. I can use command and then click on the function, and it'll show me a little bit more details about it, but it could be hard to read. So I know there's two things that it's going to look for. It's going to look for where it is that I wanted to grab test forms. So I'm going to tell it that it's going to grab an end-to-end test. So I'm going to create an end-to-end test directory. And for every test within this directory, it's going to run the test suite at the base URL of localhost 5173. So I'm going to place that here. Localhost 5173. That will be the first URL that it will go to before being able to run any test. And then I'm going to tell it that it has no supporting files. So that takes care of my end-to-end test configuration. Now, as far as the screen that I'm going to be looking at, I can also give it some configuration. So I'm just going to make this nice and easy. I'm going to tell it the viewport height for the screen will be 1024, and the viewport width, actually I got these mixed up. This will be 1024. My viewport height will be 768. Okay. And then finally, it's going to ask me, do you want me to take a video of everything that's going on? I'm going to tell it, no, don't take videos of anything. I don't need that information. So now it knows that once I run my test suite, there will be a folder named Cypress. And inside of that folder, there should be a separate directory named end-to-end. And for every file within that directory, it will go to the base URL of 5173. It will meet all these conditions and then run the file test. Does anyone have any questions about this so far?
What was the second command that you ran after the npm install Cypress?
It was npx cypress open.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go ahead and keep pushing forward at this point. We have my defined config created, but there's a couple of scripts that I want to run with my package JSON. All right. Currently, I have these scripts, but I can create new ones. So in this case, I'm going to create a script named cy open, which is just shorthand for open Cypress. And what I'm going to say the command will be Cypress open. Then I'm going to give it the cy run. And this will be utilized to run individual files. So I'm going to say that this command stands for npx cypress run, and then I'm going to tell it a specific file. And then after this, it will essentially take in some sort of file name or file path so that it can run that one file. And let me send these two on the Zoom chat here so that we have them available. Okay, so now my Cypress configuration has been completed, and my package.json now has my two shortcuts that I need. Okay, great. Now I can keep pushing forward, right? Like I said, we need to have a directory for Cypress. And that directory needs to also live at the root level. So I'm going to make a directory named Cypress. And then I'm going to make a directory within Cypress named end-to-end. So now if I open up Cypress, we can see that it also has end-to-end next to it. And now let's go ahead and change directory into Cypress end-to-end so that we can start making some tests. So now in this test, I'm going to go ahead and create something along the lines of, let's see, what could we get from here? because there is some testing conventions that we want to follow. I'm going to mimic as best as I can the test conventions that you'll see throughout your assessment so that it is not something weird once you actually see the assessment, right? So let's go ahead and go into our first one, which is going to be confirming or checking header. And then this is going to be .cy, .jsx. And the cy is what tells it that this is a Cypress test. Probably want to run the command touch. Okay, so now we can see there is a test named number1 for checking the header. All right, so just a real quick recap, we installed Cypress utilizing npm install cypress --save -dev that installed it within our dev dependencies. We then created a configuration file for Cypress named define config. We told it what the base URL for every end-to-end test will be. It will not have any support files, and specified the viewport width and viewport height. And we told it that it will not take a video for this information. Then we went into package.json and added 2 scripts, cy open, which will run the entire test suite or the entire end-to-end test suite within the Chromium browser, or sorry, Electron browser, and then cy run, which will run one specific file by the following command. Okay, great. Well, now let's actually write a test for it. All right. Well, now that we're going to go ahead and write a test, we can make the test very simple. Let's say we know that we're going to need a describe block. That describe block is going to take some sort of information with a function. We know that we're going to have an it block, which is also going to have some sort of description and a function. And then within our it block is where we can actually write our test. Well, currently I just want to check the header. So I'm just going to give that information here. So I'm going to say that this test will be happening within header JSX, and it will check. Let's say that for now, what I'm going to check is, let's inspect it. I can take a look at my header, so I don't want that to change. Okay, I have this nav tag. And then my nav tag has a container. Okay, and there's my first anchor tag with the class nav brand next to it. So I know that it's supposed to have a nav brand. Okay, so I can say check brand to state Rick and Morty. Okay, so now that's what I want to check. I want to make sure that the brand is going to be Rick and Morty. Well, now it's pretty simple. All that I need to do now is I can, sorry, go ahead.
You have a typo in describe.
I have a typo on describe. I do. Thank you. Nice. So now all I could do is I can tell CY, which is shorthand for Cypress, to visit, and then I can specify that it's going to visit here. Jesus, I can't code today. So remember, all of this is going to be prepended by our configuration file, right? So in our configuration file, we passed that it would go here first. So it goes to our local host 5173, and we're telling it to go at the closing slash. So this is where it's actually going to be going. Then I can tell it to grab cy.get, and well, I want it to grab my navbar component. And my navbar component should have a child where the division is named navbar brand. So I can say, well, one, my navbar should exist, right? And then I can say that my navbar I'm going to grab the one navbar, and then I can say should contain, because it's going to have the following class. And I can tell it that it should have a class named navbar dash brand. Okay, so now that's going to check if my navbar does exist. So there's my first test. Then it's going to check if my navbar does have a class named navbar dash brand. And now I'm just going to check if navbar dash brand has the following text. But the text that I want to make sure that it has is Rick and Morty. Okay, I don't expect this test will pass since since we just built it. More than likely there's something wrong with it, but we'll see how it goes. Well, now if I want to run this test, I can run npm run dev, because my development server needs to be running in order for my test suite to work correctly. And then I can run npm run cy open. Okay, so we can see Cypress is opening up. It's telling me my end-to-end test has been configured. It gives me an option to either choose Chrome or Electron. If you're on WSL or Linux, I recommend you choose Electron. For myself, I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to utilize Chrome. Okay, so we can see a browser for Chrome opens, and it tells me, hey, this checking header test is running right now. Okay, so the first thing I told it to do is to get the navbar, and it does get it. Now if else here, I tell it, hey, on my next test, I tell it, I need you to get the navbar, and within the navbar, I need you to contain a navbar dash brand. And it's telling me that I couldn't find it. All right. So now we can actually start the whole Googling process here. Oh. Let's go ahead and look up what's going on with our test. Let's say how to check if a class exists within a division in Cypress. That's not what we want. We don't want to check if an element exists. Okay, well, let's do it the rough way first. All right, and then we'll see if we can clean it up later on. But currently we see that we have a nav tag. Where is our nav? There it is. And it's able to grab that. Well, within our nav, we should have a container. And within that container, that's where our navbar brand should be. So let's say we can adjust this text here. So let's say our nav should have a division. Let me close the CSS layout right here. Okay, so here's our nav. There's a division. And inside of that division is where we have the nav bar brand. So let's see how this test goes. Let's try to rerun the test. Okay, the test timed out. So it looks like it was able to get the nav bar brand, but it couldn't find this class. Okay. So
Is
maybe
it the period?
go ahead.
Is it the period maybe? Because it looked like the error, it stopped right when it read the period, like it was highlighted up into the period on your browser.
Let's see. So it looks like it might be what we're trying to check. So instead of checking should contain, it looks like I should. No, that's correct. Let's see if we can do this. We know that there's supposed to be an anchor tag in there. And it should have a class of navbar brand. We run this test one more time. Okay, it's still being timed out. Let's check why. Timed out, we're trying 400 milliseconds. Let me look at that example one more time. It could be the period, actually. There it is. Yeah, so as soon as I took off the period, it seems like it was able to run well. So now let's check if we're able to check it to contain. And let's take off this division tag. So it looks like I have to specifically tell it how nested this will be. So let's go ahead and say, okay, CY dot get, because I don't want it to just assume that the nav bar would be there. You should have a division. That division should exist. That division should also have a class of container. And then we can check if the navbar has a division that has an anchor tag. Again, we could say, I want to make sure that it exists. Then I can check the anchor tag to have the class of navbar.
Can you chain the multiple shoulds? Like dot should exist, dot should have class.
Yeah, let's check that out. Looks like you can. So you're able to chain them. That way you don't have to worry about it. So let's see if we can chain this one as well. Okay, so we make sure our navbar exists. We make sure our navbar has a container within it that has a class of container. Then we make sure our navbar has a anchor tag within it that has a class of navbar brand. And now that we're able to grab that, we can also get an element by a class, which in this case, we're grabbing it by navbar brand. And we're telling it that it should have a text of Rick and Morty. So that's how we can ensure that the Rick and Morty is there. Nice. So that checks my header. What if I want to check all of the links that I have? Right, I want to check the structure of my navbar. I want to make sure that there's that there is some navigation within it. Well, let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's make another test within my end-to-end. And let's do a touch 2 dash nav structure dot cy dot jsx. Oh, I spelled that wrong, didn't I? Yep, I did. Okay, so we finished our first test. Now let's take a look at the second one. Again, it's going to need a describe block, which will have a short description and a function. We're going to need an it block, which will have a short description and a function. See, I'm getting sick. Perfect. All right. So there's our describe block. Here's our it block. Well, what do I want to check? Well, I know that as I work through my Rick and Morty API, and maybe I want to make this a full screen. Know that as I work through my Rick and Morty API, I should have these links for characters, about, and favorites. So I want to make sure that all 4 of them exist. And so I'm going to, sorry, all 3 of them. So I'm going to say this is happening within header JSX. And what I want this to do is I want to check all links are available to the correct routes. All right. So now let's see how this works, right? Before, if I inspect this page one more time, I can go ahead and use the selector tool. I have my navbar, right? My navbar has a container. Well, inside of that container, I have an anchor tag for Rick and Morty. Then I have a button that's currently not visible. And then I have this other division named navbar collapse. Okay. Once I look in there, I see a bunch of divisions and I see that I have a class link. So nav link. Now it looks like all 3 of these are sharing the same class. So I wonder what happens if I run nav link. Let's say cy dot visit. We know this is still going to happen at slash. And then I want it to get by class something called nav link. And I believe this should be a function. So let's console log this. And let's just say cy.get nav should exist. That way it has some sort of assertion, right? Okay. Our test suite is still running, so we don't need to reset. Here's our new test. All right. We can see that it gets the nav link and it's able to grab 3 of them. Okay, and it doesn't give me a console.log printed output on your console. Interesting. So here it is. Here's my printed output on my console. It tells me that there's 3. There is an array of 3, and I can grab each one of them to check where they are going. All right. So now let's evolve our test. So currently I'm grabbing by the nav link. I'm still able to console.log. I know that there's 3 of them. I already know that my navbar exists because I tested it on the prior test. But now what I can do is, now that I have these three elements, I can tell it which one of them specifically is it that I want to test. Well, I want to test, and this is EQ, which is telling it exactly which one of those three elements I want to check. Those elements came back as an array. So I know that I can enter by index. So I index 0. That should be my very first one, which is characters. I can say it should contain the text of characters. And it should have an attribute and we can see the attributes that they have. They have href attributes. So notice that in my code, these are all twos, right? I have, because I'm utilizing link from React Router DOM. But once it's being interpreted, it turns into hrefs. So these aren't actual anchor tags. These are link tags, but they still have the attribute of href. So I can check that it has the attribute of href, and that the attribute of href is actually directing me to characters. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit. So we can see cy.get, it will get the nav link, it will inspect index 0, it will make sure that index 0 has the text of characters, and that its href will send me to /characters. Okay, so now we check it one more time. Let's refresh this. All right, so it gets the nav link. It tells me there it is. There's all three of them. Let me just close this console. All right, there it is. There's all three of them. Then I tell it to grab specifically index 0. So it grabs index 0. And then I tell it, hey, this should have the text of characters. It says, yes, it does. It does have the text of characters. And then I tell it, it should also have an href attribute that goes to the value of characters, and it tells me it does. Right? Does anyone have any questions up to this point? I feel like I've been talking for quite a while.
Can you go back to the test case code, please?
Of course.
Story of my life. I miss a period and the whole thing crashes.
There you go. All right, it seems like there are no questions. So I'm going to go ahead and continue moving forward and checking the remainder of my links. So I'm going to go ahead and once again, grab by the navlink class. I am then going to specify that I want to grab index 1. Then I'm going to tell it that it should contain the text of about. And I'm going to tell it that it should have an attribute. And this attribute should be an href. And it should take me to /about. All right. Let's see if my test still works. All right, it checks the nav link, grabs index 1, makes sure that I have the correct text, and then it makes sure that I have the correct attribute. All right. And then for my final link, cy.get .navlink. I wanted to grab specifically index 2. And I wanted to check that I have the text of favorites. I think it's favorites and not favorite. Yes, it is. Okay. And then I also wanted to check that I have an attribute of an href that sends me to favorites. Okay, let's check my test. All right, there it is. It grabs 1, 2, and 3. And then from yesterday's exercise, I know that I should also have this button or this search on the right-hand side. When I can check right out here, I can see that there is a form. And I can just make sure that the form exists within the header or the nav, right? Because this is the nav. Within the nav, there is a form, and I can check that there is an input field with the attribute of name. And I can check that there is a button with the attribute of type and submit. I can even check if it's dark themed if I really wanted to. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Finally, the last test, we're going to go ahead and say cy.get. It's the only form in my entire thing, but I want to make sure that it is within the nav bar. So I want to nav, and then I want to check if it contains a form. Okay, so now I take a look at my test. So it looks like it wasn't able to identify nav this time. Oh no, it failed at the contain portion. So should contain a form. Interesting. Maybe I'm checking this incorrectly. Well, I guess I could do something like this. I can check if the form exists within the nav, like that. Right, so I'm gonna say, hey, within the nav, there should be a form and it should exist. Okay, so it does. It's able to grab the form. I know it exists. And then finally, I can say cy.get. The form should have an input field. And that input field should have an attribute of placeholder with name. Okay, so should have attribute. That attribute should be placeholder. And the value of that placeholder should be name. Okay, so now if I look at my text, I can see there's my input field. It exists and it has the attribute of name. And then finally, I just need to check that there is also a button with the attribute of type, which should be set to submit. Okay, and there's my final one. So it checks the button, and then it makes sure that that button has an attribute with the value of type, with the attribute of type and the value of submit. And this alone checks my entire navigation bar. Right, if I really want to get detailed, I can check if there's specific CSS that I really want to check to make sure this is working the way I want it to. But right now, I just care that all of these elements actually exist within my nav bar. Does anyone have any questions up to this point?
Can I see your code
Can
for
you
the
show the
test
code?
case, please?
Yeah, of course. And then you had a question, Robert?
It was the same thing Cody said.
Okay. Let me see if I can send this as well. All right, I just sent it on Slack as well.
Could you send the first test suite as well?
I definitely can. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And could you run through the last test and the second test suite one more time, please?
Like talk through it. Is that what you mean?
Yes, please.
Okay, second test and the last test. So this one?
The last test. Yeah, and the second test suite. There you go.
Got it. Yeah, so I know that I have a nav bar, right? So here's my nav bar, but I want to make sure that my nav bar also has the form. Not only does it have the container, which holds all of my link, but it should have a form pinned to the right-hand side. And I want to make sure that that form has an input with the attribute of placeholder, where the placeholder will be the name. And I want to make sure that there's a button with type submit. So now I can go ahead and check again. I want to make sure that my nav bar does have a form. So I make sure that that exists, a form within my nav bar. Then I want to grab my form because now I know it exists. And I want to make sure that there is an input field within it and that there is a button within it. Now my input field should have a placeholder of name. So it should have an attribute. That attribute should be placeholder. And the value for that attribute should be name. And I do the same thing with button. It should have an attribute. It is within a form, so I want to make sure that the type of this button is submit. So it has an attribute of type with the value of submit. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Of course.
Francisco, does it matter if you capitalize name or submit? Do those have to be exact?
Yeah, let's check. What happens if I pass in a lowercase name? What would my test suite say in that case? Well, now it failed. And it failed because name is not the same as the capital N of name. And so they actually have to be exactly the same as to what's being interpreted by the browser. Not what's being interpreted in your code, but being interpreted by the browser. So here we can see that it has a placeholder of name. And then same thing, our button has a type of submit with a lowercase s.
Okay, yep. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Of course. All right, so that's great. I made sure that all of these elements exist. But even though I checked that all of these elements exist, I haven't checked that they actually do anything. All right. Well, let's go into creating some queries. Let's make sure that our routes actually function. So let's clear and let's create a new test. Route fun. And let's make it a cy.jsx. Okay, we'll click on the third one. It needs a describe block with a small description and a function that then takes in an if block with a small description and a function. Okay, so describe. This is still happening within header.jsx. And what I want it to check for is that links will route to correct paths. So this is essentially going to check the structure between the links that I've created and if they work with my router. Well, we know that we have hrefs and all these attributes. So maybe instead of grabbing each individual attribute by EQ and then pressing it, I can grab it through the href or by the attribute. That doesn't seem like it's has the correct structure, right? So let's go ahead and we'll do both ways. We'll grab it by the attribute and then we'll grab it kind of how we did here, where we grabbed all the nav links and then we entered by index and then clicked on each one of them. So let's say first I want to specify that CY is going to visit, and it's still going to visit just index at home. All right, and then after it visits index at home, I want it to get, and here I can tell it which attribute element it is that I want it to get. I want it to get the href of slash characters. There you go. And then I just wanted to check if it exists. So should exist. So let's take a look at our test suite here. We can see we have our route functionality. So it visits index. Once our page renders, it gets the attribute or the element that has the attribute of href to the value of characters. So we can see that it gets the correct index, right? But this could be existing anywhere. So maybe I don't want to use something like this. Maybe I want to actually specify, hey, within my nav bar, there should be these links, kind of like how we did here. All right, so I'm just going to take this from here and bring it straight into my router. And let's say dot exist for now. So now we can see that this test will also pass. It will visit, grab the 3 nav links, grab the first one, and then check if it exists. Okay. Great. I have this information, but now I wanted to check if it's able to work. So I'm going to tell it that instead of clicking it, I want it to click. I mean, that instead of just making sure that it exists, I want it to click on this actual HTML attribute. And once I click it, well, I want to check that the location has changed. So I can call location. I could pass in should. Again, I'm ensuring that I'm checking the location. And now I can tell it that I want to expect the location path name, because we know that that's something that comes back from location, to equal slash characters. Okay, so let's see what happens here. I go over. Okay, so now we see that the tests happen one by one. So first I visited this slash. Then I checked that there were nav links, and it's telling me there's 3 of them. Well, then I grabbed the very first one, and then I clicked on it. So there's my click. It's showing me that's what it looked like before the click, and this is what it looked like after the click. I noticed that it's very specific. The use state hasn't even been triggered. Like the process for the use state hasn't been rendered yet. So here's before, here's after. Well, after, I wanted to check the location. So it grabs the 5173. And then it makes sure that the location is actually equal to / characters. And it's not showing it to me here on the browser, unfortunately. But it does work, right? It's showing me my location is now 5173. Oh, here it is. I just had to click on the assertion. So 5173, and it's able to show me all of the API responses that are coming back. And notice that it's even showing me all the requests that were sent, right? We had a bunch of requests because of how many pages there is for all the characters. So it shows me that all the requests were sent and they came back with status code 200. Does anyone have any questions over that? Want to take a look at the code one more time?
Yes, please.
I might need some help later on. I've got a couple issues that I'm not sure if it's going to be a quick fix.
Okay. Yeah, so here we can see that we have our cy.visit. We can see our cy.get. It's grabbing the very first one. But this is a little bit of some newer syntax, right? We wanted to grab the location, which is a function. Okay, so we grab the location. And then we're telling it, hey, this should do something. But we're checking a location, so should typically just takes in one argument, but now we're passing in an entire function into it. So what I'm saying is, once this is triggered, I want you to make sure to, so one, I want you to grab the path name of the name of the location that we're currently in. So it's going to check the URL. It's going to cut out the localhost 5173, and then it's going to grab anything afterwards if there is anything. And then I'm going to tell it, you need to make sure that this is equal to the following. And then it makes sure that it's equal to characters. All right. So now we check this one. We could do the same for the remainder of the test. I want to, again, grab all the elements that have nav links. I then wanted to grab element 1 or index 1. I wanted to click. And then I'm going to check the location. I want to expect this location path name to equal. In this case, I believe that was my favorites. Nope, that's about. Okay, so now I can come back over. Again, it visits index. Oh. It then gets my nav, which is all 3 of them. And makes sure that characters, I may have to rerun this test. Okay. It gets my nav, then makes sure that there is 3 characters and it grabs the first one. It clicks on it. It's freaking out on me. It grabs all of my characters, grabs the nav links once again, clicks on about, and then makes sure that it is actually going to the about page. All right, and then I have one final test or one final link that I want to make sure is working correctly. Again, I'm going to grab all of the links that have nav link included into them. In this case, I want to get index 2. I want to click on it. And then I want the location to be equal to favorites. Okay, I can see my third test. Visits, here's my empty page, grabs the nav links, clicks on the first one. It goes into characters. Then gets my nav links. Grabs the index 1 of characters and clicks. Checks the location, goes to my about page, again grabs the nav links, grabs index 2 and clicks. Goes to location and makes sure it is going to my favorites. So now I know that all of my functionality when it comes to my navbar, as far as these three, are working correctly. The final thing that I need to check is that my search bar is working. All right, so just like before, I'm gonna grab the navbar, or I'm gonna grab the form input. Sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and come down here. I'm gonna say cy.get. I want you to grab the form and grab the input. And I want you to type in it. What I want you to type is Pickle Rick. Okay, we can see that it's actually typing. Clicks there. Before, there's nothing. Afterwards, Pickle Rick is in there. And then after that, I want you to click on my forms button. Then I can check the location. I expect the location dot path name to equal results slash pickle Rick slash. And this percentage 20 is to account for the space. So now we can come back. There seems like there was an Axios error somewhere. Well, I can just rerun this. Okay, so it looks like my expectation for my path is what failed. So it takes in the input. It's able to grab it. And I think it was able to click on the element. So it works up to the click. But then once I want to check the location to be Pickle Rick, it's giving me an error.
It looked like it was typing weird, but maybe it was just because it was sending so many requests. Is that why it was like typing pickle Rick? Like it looked like it was bugging out.
Yeah, I think so. Let me make sure. The location that fails.
Pickle wrong there.
Expected favorites? Why would you expect favorites? Is that what I told it to expect? No.
Line 33 is missing an L. Did you just take that out?
Line 33 is missing what?
The letter L for pickle.
Oh, would you look at that? It could be it.
He took out the 20 percentage sign 20, Rick.
One step at a time. I'm almost there. Okay, expected favorites for some reason. But it got Pickle Rick, which is what it's supposed to get. It's supposed to get Pickle Rick. Why does it keep saying expected favorites?
Is it maybe like your favorites has like a flex property where it stretches all the way across, so it thinks it's clicking on favorites, but it's actually clicking on your box, like your input? Because it says something about covering. It had an error before saying like this element's covered by something.
Hmm. It looks like this click may not be registering. Let's see, let's try the good old turn it off and turn it back on. Okay, that didn't work either. Let's close. Yep, turn it off and turn it back on. Works every time. All right, there you go. There's the Pickle Rick. So just in case you get some weird behavior with your test suite and you know you're doing it correctly, remember, turn it off, turn it back on. That's more than likely the issue. Yep, 60% of the time it works every time. All right, awesome. Okay, we've been going on for about an hour now. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break and let's come back at 10:23 to continue on with our lecture. Thank you so much, everyone. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and continue with our project. So far we were able to get our nav bar completely flushed out. We know that our nav bar is working, that it's taking us to the correct parameters, and it's rendering the correct pages. Well, now, let's say that we want to inspect each individual page, right? What happens when I go to characters? Or what happens when I go to Rick and Morty? Well, there should be a division with a Rick and Morty header being displayed on it. Well, let's take a look at what that looks like within our browser. All right, so here's our browser. What does this Rick and Morty header look like? Well, it looks like it's an H2 tag, right? And it's in our homepage. It says Rick and Morty, and we can see that there is a division with the ID of homepage. So that's perfect. We could just check if the homepage exists, right? Or the division with the ID of homepage exists. And then we can check that there is an H2 tag that says the Rick and Morty fan page. So this is going to be an easy one to construct a test for. So let's go ahead and tackle that now. So let's make our fourth test, which is going to be homepage structure .jsx. Let's go ahead and open up that test. And let's start with our test. We're going to describe. So we'll take a description. And then we need an if block. That will also take a description and a function. Okay, so this is happening in homepage. .jsx, and it will confirm homepage division. Actually, I'll just say content. Okay, we have to tell Cypress that it's going to visit slash. And after it goes there, we also need to tell Cypress what is it that it's going to check for. I'm going to tell Cypress to get by the ID of homepage and confirm that it exists. Okay, well now I can go to my Chromium and refresh this maybe. It's not able to recognize it. Did I name this incorrectly? I did. I missed the CY at the end. There it is. Okay, so now I can go to page 4, goes visits the home. It checks that there is a home page and that it exists. Okay, well now I can make sure that CY.get homepage it should have an H2 component. And it should have text where that text is Rick and Morty fan page. Okay, so it grabs the division with the ID of homepage. It makes sure that there is a H2 element. And then it makes sure that it has the text of the Rick and Morty fan page. So there's our homepage. Our homepage is done. All right, it's working correctly. I think another easy one that we can take care of is our about page. So let's make that our next test. And instead of going to slash, I wanted to go to about. It should still have a home page. It should still have an H2 element. I can check that, or I can go to about. We can see that it still has the ID of home page. And it still has an H2 element. The only difference is that now the H2 element says about Rick and Morty. So let's change that. Okay. So now we can go to our about page structure. It goes to slash about, checks that there is a home page, a division with a home page ID, that it has an H2 element, and that it has the text of about Rick and Morty. Does anyone have any questions over these two tests that we just created? Homepage and the about page. Go ahead, Josh.
Can you tell us why you put hashtag homepage, home dash page on line 5? Like, why did you decide to put that in there?
Yeah. So we take a look at this element here. This is a division where the ID.
Oh, that's the ID. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just grabbing it by the ID. Of
Cool, thanks.
course. Any other?
So,
Go ahead.
like, at what point would like certain Bootstrap features or components get in the way? Like, you find a really good component you think that would help you with your project because it has what you think you're looking for, but it's actually screwing up test cases. Does that happen a lot?
So it can, right? Maybe you have a class that matches something else that's working with Bootstrap. If you have to be careful with the selectors that you're utilizing to grab individual things, right? That's why it's important that IDs are unique and classes are for multiple objects. So that if you bring in something from some sort of library and it shares a class with something else that you've already created or something else that's already living on your page, you could fix your test by giving IDs to specific items so that they're no longer being accessed throughout the test suite. Does that make sense?
Yes, I might have like amplifying questions later, but I gotta formulate them.
Okay. Can you explain why the about page test is referencing homepage? Yeah, definitely. So homepage is referencing to an ID, right? And currently, actually, I could probably show this in the code. If we take a look at our pages and we pull up both our homepage and our about page, well, we can see that our about page does have a division with the ID of homepage, right? We can also see that homepage has an ID or a division with the ID of homepage. So the test isn't referencing an actual page, it's referencing an ID. And that ID was given to a parent division in both our home and about page. Does that answer your question, Kate?
Yeah, it does. Sorry, this naming I think just confused me. I appreciate it.
Of course, no problem at all. All right. So now we were able to take care of our home page and our about page. That's great. But now what about our characters? Right? Our characters page might be a little bit more complicated because one, we have to make sure that there's 820 elements within it. And we also have to make sure that all 820 elements are rendering a Bootstrap card. So let's take care of that first. Let's create our 6th test. And this is going to be our characters page. Here it is. Again, it's going to take in a describe block. That describe block will have a short description and a function. We will have an it block. That will also take in a short description and a function. Now we can start telling it what it's going to check. Well, this will check characters page.jsx and it will check that 820 cards, Bootstrap cards, more specifically, are being rendered. I'm not going to check every single one of those components, right? Maybe I could check the first and the last. That way I can make sure there's some sort of consistency. But I'm definitely not going to check the content of 820 cards. I'm going to check that all 820 cards exist, but not their content. Okay, so now I have my Bootstrap cards. And now, how can I grab this information? Well, first I want to tell Cypress to visit characters. And then after it visits characters, well, let's take a look at our browser here. If I look at my characters, so here's my row. The very first thing that I get is an H2 of characters. So let's make sure that that exists. So cy.get, there should be only one H2, and it should have the text of characters. All right, so that should take care of that. Well, now, how do we take a look at all the cards? We can see that all of them have a class of card. So maybe I can say cy.get, and I want to grab by the class of card. And then I can check how many of them exist. Well, I can say that there should be 820 of them. So let's say should have length. And is it 820? Or I think it's like 826. Let me see. Rick and Morty. Take a look at the docs. Get all characters. 826. Okay. And I can check that there's 826. Well, now let's see what happens. And I do expect to get some weird behavior on this one because it's doing a call recursively. So it's probably going to take a while. Okay, so it looks like it timed out before it was able to complete all of my calls. So maybe I need to set a timer to this. All right, because here we can see not enough elements. There was only 320 and it expected 826. So let's see. Oh, this is the incorrect browser. Testing. Okay, so here you go. We can give it a timeout function, and it looks like it runs in milliseconds. It says place this in the it log. Okay, let's take a look at that. So within the it block, looks like it's something that I want to utilize. I don't know if it should go at first or at the end. It just says to place it in the it block. Maybe they have a link to the documentation. They do have a link to the documentation. All right. Default timeout, no arguments. Okay, but I can press it. I can place it within the it block because it's running that. Okay. Well, let's see. This is 10,000 milliseconds. That should be more than enough. Let's see what our test does. Okay, so our assertion failed because it was only able to collect 340. So maybe let's make this, let's double it. Let's add another 0 in there. I don't think this timeout function is working. That is a considerable amount of time now. Yeah, and it's not actually changing the time that it takes for the assertion. If I do something like this. Oh man, I think you guys are about to watch me utilize ChatGPT at its finest.
Cypress has a .wait one, right? That does in milliseconds.
Where do you see that?
It was something I was trying out when I was trying to get my favorites one working, and I would like it sort of works. I don't know, like you could try like CY like before you get the cards, do CY.wait. And then just do like 8,000, because that'd be like 8 seconds. I don't know how long the tests take, but that's how long mine were taking.
Also, just to add, I decreased the time and it got all 826 to render.
Yep, there it is. CY.wait seemed like it did the trick. What did you say, Josh, as well?
Oh, instead of increasing the time, I decreased the time to see if that changed anything, and it got into work.
You decreased the time, and that worked?
Yeah, for some reason.
Yeah, that's weird. All right, so now I'm able to ensure that all 820 characters are being rendered. So that's great. Again, maybe I can make sure that there's only one being that I'm gonna check the content of 1 and 3. I mean 1 and the last one. So I'm gonna kind of run the same functionality here. So I'm gonna say cy.get hard. I'm gonna grab index 0. And index 0 should have the following. So here's my card. It should have an image. And it should have a body. All right, so we could check the card body and the card image as well. So let's say should interesting. I wonder if I'm able to do something like this. Okay, so I'm able to check that there is all of those, and I'm able to grab index 1. And then I can say should have an attribute of source with the following value. Oh, that's not what I meant, where I meant to go. So it's going to check that I have the image, the card at index 0, and that it has an attribute of source with the value of the Rick and Morty API for the character of 1, which is Rick Sanchez. Okay, so that worked. I'm going to do the same thing for I'm going to do the same thing for the header. Right? But instead of the card image, I wanted to grab the card body. Looks like we could just grab the card title H5 class. Let's just grab card title. Yep, so that should grab card title, and it should have the text of, I think it's Rick Sanchez in this case. Rick Sanchez. Okay, so now if I take a look at my test suite, we see that it's waiting the 8 seconds for all the calls to happen. Okay, looks like 8 seconds wasn't enough that time. Let's re-render this. Okay, so 8 seconds was more than enough. It grabs the very first image and it makes sure that it's actually Rick Sanchez. And then it grabs the very first text and then makes sure that it is actually Rick Sanchez. I can see that it's starting to kind of act weird on me. So I'm going to go ahead and close it and restart it. I'm going to give it its 8 seconds so that it runs through all 42 pages. Okay, so there's my image. And then here's my title, Rick Sanchez. Okay, good. So there's the first one. And now I could do it for the last one. Right? It's just instead of doing all of this, I can copy it. I can paste it. And instead of doing 0, I wanted to do it for 825, I believe, right? Because there's 826. Yep. So index 825. I've never actually scrolled to the bottom, so I don't know who that's going to be. Let's see. So who would the last one be? Let's get a single character here. I'm just trying to get the information for who the last individual will be. I'm assuming their ID will be 826. Oh, and it's the robot. Nice. So the very last character that we'll see will be the Butterbot. So now I can change that within my test. So there's the butter robot. And we can also grab their image, which is here. Oh. Okay, so now we come back over. Here's our test suite. I think it's waiting its 8 seconds right now. Okay, its 8 seconds are up. It was able to confirm that there's 826. Then confirms index 1. It goes to index 825 and it grabs the robot. And same thing for the title to grab the robot. So now I check the first and the last, and I make sure that all the character cards are loading. And I know that this class of card is from Bootstrap. And that is how you test your character's function. This is quite a bit of code. I'm going to go ahead and share this through Slack as well, so that we all have access to it. But does anyone have any questions over how we built this test suite here?
I guess I have a quick question. How would you like, I don't know if this would happen, but like in the example you grab, like confirm one image exists for a card. I mean, what would you, what if like you wanted to confirm all 826 exist? And you don't have to write the whole code out or anything. Just curious.
So you could do this still, right? You could still check that all 826 images exist, but do you mean like with the correct input?
Yeah, like the correct input, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's where it gets tricky because you would essentially have to have a source of truth, right? And you wouldn't want that source of truth to be an API. You wouldn't want to be making an API call within your test suite and then ensuring that the API call matches what's coming back from your product. So you would have to create some sort of JSON file that holds all 826 image URLs, and then you can correlate them by ID or something along those lines. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so now I have my first and my last. Everything has been checked. My characters page is built out. But I haven't made sure that for my characters page, I can go to my details page. So that's going to be our next portion. Let's say that we want to go and see Rick Sanchez in the details page. So we're going to have to do another test. Let's get this going. All right, so let's go to touch 7 dash details or character details. Just gonna do details page. A character page dash structure dot cy dot jsx. Okay, good. So then I'm gonna go ahead and start my describe block. That should have a short description with a function. Gonna start my it block, which should also have a short description with a function. And I can start telling it what it's going to do. So I'm gonna check a character page.jsx, and it will ensure you can select a character and view their details within the character page.jsx. All right. So there's my description. And I know what the it block is doing, so it's telling me what this is going to be checking for. So now I can say, hey, well, I want you to go to the characters. So cy dot visit. I want you to visit characters. And then let's just say that I wanted to wait for a little bit to make sure that I have some characters that I can work with. So let's just give it like a second to wait. Okay, and then after that, I wanted to grab the very first card that comes in. So in this case, it will be Rick Sanchez. Just like we did before, we were able to grab a card by doing this. So I can say cy.get. I wanted to grab a card, but I don't just want it to get a card. I wanted to make sure that this button exists. So let's take a look at what this button looks like. So it's going to grab the card. Within that card, I wanted to check the card body, and then I wanted to grab the button where the class attribute is a primary. So it looks like it's going to give me multiples, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and go in this. So we have our card, which should have a class of, or a division. So there's my cards. Said card should have a division. And within this division, there should be a button. And let's log this onto the console so that we can make sure this is working and that it's actually returning something. All right, so here's my weight, and here's where it gets it. And it tells me that there's 40 of them. Okay, and if I take a look at my console now, Well, that console, we can see that it's an array. And each one of those arrays, it triggers both the button primary and the button warning. Well, it's okay. I just wanted to grab the very first button. So I'm going to take off this console log statement. I'm going to give it the EQ of 0. And then I want it to click this EQ. So let's see what it does. Okay, it clicks it, takes me to Rick Sanchez, and it takes me to the details. Well, the first thing that I need to check is the location. I want to make sure that this actually rerouted me to the correct location. So we've seen that test before. Here's our route functions. So let's make sure that this is working well. All right, so CY location should be check the location, and the location's path name should be character at /1. The following error originated from your test code, not from Cypress. Cannot CY location outside a running test. It is not outside a running test. Yes, it is. Okay. So there it runs it, clicks on Rick Sanchez, and then checks my path. So my path is working well. It's able to render the details pages, or at least I know that it's able to take me to the correct URL. Okay. Well, now what happens in my details pages? Let's click on details. Well, I want to make sure that I have this image. I want to make sure that I have this UL with the correct items, and that I have Rick Sanchez. So let's take a look at what we got. First, I have a division of a character. Within the division of a character, I have an image and an unordered list. So now that it clicks it, I can say cy.wait, because I want to make sure that that request is being completed. And I can say that I wanted to grab the ID of a character. Not only do I want it to grab the ID of a character, but I also want it to check the image. And the image should have an attribute of source matching Rick. All right. So it gets the character's image, and they should have the attribute matching Rick. Great. Well, what about the unordered list? I could check each one of them if I really wanted to, especially since there's only 4, right? So I can say UL and then LI. Now, if we take a look at the test suite, we can see that it waits. Oh, where are we at? Okay, so it starts off, visits characters. It waits 1,000 milliseconds, and then it gets a card's division button. I choose the details of number 1, and I click it. Well, after I click it, it takes me to this location where I wait 1,000 milliseconds so that I can get my character. And then I check my image to make sure that it has the correct attribute. But when I click on this ULLI, it gives me my 5 points. So I have species, I have gender, origin, etc., etc. So now I can just grab this information, and I could actually probably just grab it straight from the API as well. See. Okay, it might be simpler if I just copy and paste from here. Okay, so it has this information. I can say that index 0 should have text a species human. Index 1 should have the text of gender male. Okay, so index 2, and actually let me just paste this a couple of times. Okay, so here we have index 1, that's been completed. Don't need that. Index 2, gender male. So here's index 3. I need to grab the origin. Oh no, did I forget to check? Oh, here you go. This is index 2. Got it mixed up. I apologize. Okay, so that takes care of that. Then we have index 3. And finally, we have index 4. Okay, so let's make sure that this is all working. Goes over, goes to the details page, and then it grabs each one of the LI items to make sure that it has the correct content within it. Okay, so there's our details page. Almost done with this project. The last thing that I need to do is check my favorites functionality. I need to be able to add characters onto favorites. So let's see what that looks like. If I go over to characters and I click on this add button, I can see that I have a button warning class that I can likely grab. I can just grab this button warning class and I can grab the first 4 indexes. So let's do that. Let's say touch 8 dash favorites function .cy.jsx. Let me share this file here. Okay, and actually I apologize. I might be trying to move on to the next step a little sooner rather than later. Does anyone have any questions over how we built this test? No questions. Too easy? All right, too easy. Let's move on to the final function of adding onto our favorites. So again, we start off with a describe block. This is going to take in some text and a function. We create our it. which is going to take in a short description with a function. All right. So this describe block, we know that it's essentially checking favorites.jsx. I think this is favorites page. And it will check adding and removing from favorites. Okay. So again, we want CY to visit the characters page. And then from there, we're going to want to grab all of the buttons with button warning. But we also want to wait for this request to be completed. So let's do CY wait. Let's give it around 1,000 milliseconds just to start getting us some content. Let's just go ahead and get the very first ones. And this is going to be button dash warning. So button dash warning. Okay. So now let's take a look at our test suite. We go over to the last one, gives it a couple milliseconds, and then it gets a button dash warning, which comes back with 60 elements. All right, we can see there's 60 elements coming back. That's great. Well, now I'm going to click on the first 4. So let's say cy.eq 0.click. Okay, so here's index 1, index 2, and index 3. So that should add the first 4. Well, finally, I can then tell CY to visit, or actually I'm going to tell it to click. But where is it that I want it to click? I want it to click on favorites. So how did I get it to find out where favorites is located? I think that was in my nav bar structure. Okay, so here's my nav link. Here it is. So I wanted to go to favorites. Okay. So first it grabs the buttons. It's going to add the first 4 of them that populate. And then it's going to look for the nav links. It's going to identify the third link, which is favorites, and then click on it. So let's see what happens here. All right, so first it starts off at characters. We wait 1,000 milliseconds. Grabs all the buttons. There's 40 of them. Clicks on the first one. Clicks on the second, the third, and the fourth, which gives me all the way up to Beth. Goes up to the nav links. Clicks on the second one. And then once it clicks on the second one, we can see that it takes me to a new URL. So there's the before, here's the after. Takes me over to favorites. Okay, great. I don't need to check the location because I already checked it before. So I know that this is working correctly. But now what I need to do is make sure that there's actually 4 cards in here. So now let's go ahead and cy.get. We know that they have the value of card. And I can say should have length of 4. Okay, it's trying to run my test. And here I can tell it, hey, there should be a length of 4. And we see that it works. Well, I can easily knock out another test and say I could only have 3. I mean, I could only have 4, right? So let's see what happens if I try to add another individual. I should still only have 4. Right? Because that last one shouldn't allow me to add anyone. Because obviously I am only limited to 4 favorite characters. Okay, so now from here, I just want to make sure that I can remove. So let's say that I want to remove Summer, right? She should be index 2. So now I can go ahead and run this button primary again. Click on the button warning and make sure that I'm clicking on 2. And then that should bring my total number of cards down to 3. Okay, good. So visit characters. I made 1,000 milliseconds, which is a second. I get all my button warnings. I add my first, which is Rick. Add a second, which is Morty. Third, which is Summer. Then I add Beth. After that, I do one more click on whoever is next to Beth. I don't know who it is. But this one is not supposed to add anyone to favorites. And we can see that even after we click on it, it didn't change. It was add, and even after we click on it, it stayed as add. It stayed as as. Then we went to the nav bar. We find favorites. We click on that link. So here's before. Here's after we click on it. It takes me to my favorites page. I then get all of the cards within my favorites page and make sure that there's 4 of them. I get the button warnings that are available. There's 4 of them. And I click on Summers to remove. So there's the click. Here's before the click. Here's what happens after. All right, so before I still have Summer. After, I no longer have Summer. I grab my cards again, and I make sure that there's only 3 of them, meeting all of my requirements. And just like that, I've created a test suite that reinforces all of the requirements provided by the Rick and Morty project for this week. And then finally, let me go ahead and share this code here. All right, does anyone have any questions over anything that we covered today? Bless you.
I'll ask a question if no one has any. First of all, Francisco, I think your laptop was about to die. I want to
Oh, good call.
plug that in.
Yeah.
But I was just curious, like, so I mean, you had all this coded and then you wrote the test, but I was curious, now that you have the test written, if you could walk us through maybe the mindset you would go about if like if you were handed these tests, how you would look at this and then go about your test-driven development from the starting point of one of these tests.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that should be a fairly simple one. Maybe we could do the about page that way. I would like to do one of the more complicated ones, but unfortunately we have a retro in 15 minutes. So we're gonna have to stick to something simple like the about page. So currently, if let's say I just delete my about page, right? And it's just returning some fragmented tags. And in here, I just have something that says, I don't know, maybe a P tag. It says about page. Okay. Well, now if I go to my about page, it should fail. All right, we can see that it's failing. Well, the first thing that I would see is, okay, well, it's going to my about page, and that's actually working. But then it's telling it to get something with the ID of homepage. So I know that there's supposed to be someplace the ID of homepage. So then maybe my first thought is, why don't I just give it the ID of homepage here? Why wouldn't that fix the problem, right? So I refresh the page. Well, it gets the homepage, but then it tells me that it needs an H2 element. So now at this point, I could see like maybe there's a couple of nested elements. Maybe it's not just as simple as placing in the homepage. So I tell myself, well, let's look at the test suite and see what it's saying. I go over to the test suite, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to close all these other files that I have opened. Okay, and I can see that it's confirming that it exists, but then I should also have an H2 element that confirms that there is a Rick and Morty API. And I can see that it's nested. So that already tells me that that H2 element is living nested within something. Well, I wouldn't want to wrap an H2 element within a paragraph tag. So I would turn this into a division. And then this division would then have an H2 element. If I look at the test, I know that it will exist, but then it also tells me this is exactly the text that should be within that H2 tag. So now I can just include my H2 tag. I can rerun the test. Did I not give it the ID of homepage? What did I mess up here? Nope.
It looks like you're modifying test 4, but running test 5.
Oh, I am on the, sorry. About page. There you go. And I wasn't modifying the test. Sorry, I was just reading the test. So here it is. It should have about, not Rick and Morty fan page. So now I can fix that. Okay, so it's going to check that the homepage does exist. It's going to check that there is an H2 element that also exists. And then it's going to make sure that I have the correct text within it. So now we run it, goes to the about page, make sure that there is a homepage ID. That ID should also have a nested H2 element. So I make sure that it exists. And then it checks that it has the correct text of about Rick and Morty. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yeah, I think that was helpful. Thanks.
Of course. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. If there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.